It is the most favorite verse in the Bible for children everywhere who are told you have to remember a Bible verse before Sunday school next week. 2 words, Jesus wept. It's in the 11th chapter of the Gospel of John, and I invite you to turn now to John 11, 1 through 45, and read this story of the raising of Lazarus. So they send to Jesus to tell him that Lazarus is ill. Jesus waits 4 days before he goes. He says that the illness is for the glory of God. Now that's an odd thing for a friend to do, to wait 4 days to go, but the 4 is significant because the 4th day would then be the first day of the new creation in a resurrection measuring of time. When he comes to Mary and Martha's in Bethany, when he approaches their house, Martha meets him by the roadside, and she says to him something we've always believed, and we may have even in times of crisis ourselves thought, Lord, if you'd been here, if you'd only been here, he wouldn't have died. But I believe that even now you can do something about this. And Jesus says to her, that famous passage that we read frequently at funerals, actually in our liturgy we begin funerals with them. Jesus says to her, I am the resurrection and I am life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, yet shall they live. Now hold on to this. Remember what we said before. Life is something about a qualitative state of being with Jesus. It's not just an issue of quantity. He's offering Martha and Mary and later Lazarus himself. He's offering them something more than what they've had before. The story unfolds. It's a familiar story. He goes to the house. Mary comes out. Everyone's crying. He begins to cry. He goes to the cemetery with them. And then the story becomes strikingly familiar. There's weeping in the cemetery. There is a cave with a stone rolled in front of it. The stone is rolled away. A dead man comes forth. You know how you get trailers at the movie theater about a coming attraction? This is a trailer for what's going to come in the 19th and 20th chapters of the Gospel. A cave, a stone, a tomb, death, and then suddenly, unexpectedly, life. So we get this trailer here. We get this sort of preview of what's coming in Jesus' life. He weeps. He calls Lazarus forth. And when Lazarus comes out, by the way, there's this great, version of this in the King James Version where when he tells them to move the stone away, someone says to him, Lord, he stinketh. He's been there 4 days. He calls Lazarus forth, and he says, unbind him and let him go. That at this level is to those standing around Lazarus. Lazarus' traditional burial customs in the ancient world would have been for Lazarus to have been wrapped tightly in cloth. He's telling those standing there at this level, unbind him, take the cloths off. But at this level, he's speaking to death. He's saying to death, I have power over you, and I have power over Lazarus. You no longer control Lazarus. You have to unbind him and let him go. He belongs now to me. The fascinating thing about this story is that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the thing that Jesus does that causes the leaders to want to put him to death is cleanse the temple. In the Gospel of John, the thing that Jesus does that caused the leaders to want him to put him to death is to give life to Lazarus. Giving life to us can only come from his own death. And John's connecting for us these two stories, Lazarus' death and Jesus' death, as if to say the only way we have life is through the death of Jesus. The question, though, hangs in the air. The question he asks Martha becomes the critical question of the story. Do you believe this? Not, do you believe that I can raise your brother Lazarus? Not, do you believe that I can perform miracles? He says to Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? Do you believe in me? Believing in him becomes the key to receiving the gift of life. So the question for us this week is, do you believe this? Do you believe in him? Not in the miracle, not in the creed. Do you believe in him? So in Bethany, outside of Jerusalem, there's this place with this sign that says it's the site of Lazarus' tomb. And if you go to the Holy Land, they'll take you there and they'll take you into Lazarus' tomb. And You go into this place, and then you go down this very long, steep set of stairs. Each step's very narrow, till you come to the bottom, and there's this rock ledge, and they say that's where Lazarus was. You start wondering where he is now, because you know he died again, and he's not there. And then you start coming back up, and the steps, as I said, are narrow and steep, and you start to wonder, or at least I did, how Lazarus, bound with grave cloths, managed to climb out of that thing. Did he hop up one step at a time? Is this where the Easter bunny came from, this image of Lazarus hopping up a step at a time? And when he gets to the top, we're told in the gospel, Jesus says to someone, unbind him and let him go. I think the someone he's speaking to is death. I think he wants death to unbind Lazarus and let him go. Death is not just when we stop breathing or when our heart stops beating. Death is one of the powers and principalities the Bible speaks of. It gets us in its grip, and it keeps us from living life to its fullest. It stops us from being everything we are created to be. And there are times in our life, and there are times in our faith journey when death has us in its grip, and we need to hear a word of life from Jesus. So where does death have you in its grip right now, if it does? And what would it feel like in your faith journey to hear Jesus say to you and to the death that's holding on to you, unbind him and let him go? We live in a world of Good Fridays. The good die young. Prejudice, injustice, and violence seem to rule the day. So how can we talk about the glory of God? When Lazarus was dying, Jesus told his disciples, this illness does not lead to death, rather it is for the glory of God. When Howard Thurman was a boy living in the days of segregation in the United States, he experienced the illness of prejudice. A white child stuck him with a pin. Howard was shocked by the surprise jab in his hand, and he asked, have you lost your mind? And the other child replied, oh, Howard, that didn't hurt you. You can't feel. The child was wrong. Howard could feel. And he felt more than just a pinprick. He felt the illness of prejudice. Howard Thurman grew up reading the Bible to his grandmother, a former slave, and she taught him about Jesus. She taught him that love is stronger than hate. Howard Thurman became a minister, a teacher, a chaplain, and a civil rights advocate. As a proponent of racial harmony, he founded the first multiracial interfaith church in the United States, the International Fellowship Church in San Francisco. In his autobiographical work, With Head and Heart, Thurman reflects on his early childhood experience. It was Jesus with whom I talked as I sat under my oak tree, fingering the bruises and scars of my childhood, he wrote. So where is the glory of God? The glory of God is seen in the life of Lazarus when Jesus raised him from the dead. The glory of God is seen in the life of Howard Thurman when Jesus used the pinprick of his childhood to forge a mighty force for racial reconciliation in adulthood. This is from Thurman's meditation, Our Little Lives. He writes, our little lives, our big problems, we place them upon the altar. Pour out upon us whatever our spirits need of shock, of lift, or of release, that we may find strength for these days, courage and hope for tomorrow. In confidence we rest in thy sustaining grace, which makes possible triumph and defeat, gain and loss, and love and hate. We rejoice this day to say our little lives, our big problems, these we place upon thy altar. When has God transformed a hurt in your life for his glory? And in what way is our church at First United Methodist being used by God to foster harmony and reconciliation?